Brendan Fingles, and I am the producer of All Things Irish and Rock and Roll. In the studio, I'm joined by a very good friend of mine, Mr. Johnner McCann. In my opinion, Johnner is probably one of the best drummers to ever come out of Ireland. He played with some of the great bands back in the 70s, 80s and 90s, such as Red Peter's Dublin Floating Blues Band, Zebedee, Red House, Philip Donnelly ex Gary Moore, and of course the legendary The Business, which are still going today. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to Mr. Johnner McCann. Okay, Johnner, what year did it all start for you?
63, 64, but I found myself sort of liking the Rolling Stones, and then of course 66, Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and all that sort of stuff. Now I really like the Beatles. They were magical. So I was around 13 or 14, and at the time I was too young to be playing. You know, everybody else was about 18, so there was 4 or 5 year gap between me starting to play and getting interested in it. First thing I did, I suppose, was I went up to the Hope Pipe band and learned all the rudiments there. I didn't play with the band, so I was doing that, and there was a band, local band around the corner called The Shy, and we used to skip over out the back and listen in to the rehearsing, and it was just magical for me to hear these guys with electric guitars and drum kits, and they played all the pop tunes, they played all the hits, the Kinks, whatever was going they played, and I just thought it was magical, just the whole sound and everything. And so the first time I was behind the drum kit was the drummer had to go off, and we happened to be in the shed, and so they said, would you like to try it? It was Rolling Stones, Get Off My Cloud, would you believe? So I hadn't really got the first time behind the drum kit, so they were saying go boom cha 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 digga digga. So we did that, and it was very exciting, I have to say, nerve-wracking but exciting. And funny enough, then after a while I did get a kit. It was a kit of Star, never heard of since, a white pearly kit, but everybody used to remark on the bass drum sound for some reason, which I don't think I ever got that bass drum sound again of anything. But and I actually started playing with that guy, Ray Grant. I have to mention Ray Grant because he was part of the scene locally and still is to this day. So we had a 3-piece, 2 guitars and drums, and did weddings and dinner dances and stuff like that. And then I progressed to, of course, all the lads I was hanging around with, they were tipping away with this and the other, but they weren't going to be, you could see that they weren't really into it. And I think Ray was working in Merville Dairies, and I think Jimmy Gaynor was working in Merville Dairies as well. So for some reason, I can't remember how we all hooked up, but we all hooked up that way. And I came across Jimmy, Brendan, Davy Gaynor's brother, Paul Shorthall, and Paddy Mulligan, and a fella called Branno, singer. And I went out to rehearsal, and they all had all the gear. They had Marshalls, Gibsons, Fenders, PA. It was like, wow, these guys, know what they're doing. And we played mostly Black Sabbath, Jimi Hendrix, Mountain, all of those things. That was around 69, 70. We used to do the local rugby club. We had a few nights there. We'd do support, and then we'd organise some gigs locally ourselves, Santa Sabina and stuff like that, or the odd gig in Kerry, which was gas. And everywhere we went, we were playing Black Sabbath. Sure, nobody wanted to hear it, but it's amazing, 50 years on nearly, that set would still attract an audience today. And of course, the style of drumming at that stage was, before that, I suppose we started going to see Skid Row, the Granny's Intentions, Orange Machine, the Method, all this. They used to all come to the local hall Saturday and Sunday. And I remember down in the local hall in Baldoyle, Philip Lynott walking in, you know. Gary Moore, Rush, Noel Bridgman. I mean, and there'd be 4 or 5 of us up the front, just standing with our mouths open, wondering how the hell we going to ever achieve this, you know. Or to me, they were Ireland's Beatles, you know. They were just absolutely. I loved the Granny's Intentions. I loved the Uptown Band. I loved all those bands as well. The Strangers and Some People. They were a poppy band, you know. And the funny thing about it is, at the Red House stage, which I suppose was the first rock band that we played in, we didn't know anything about the business or anything like that. It was all about just playing the latest thing that came out, as it were. And at that stage, and everything was learnt off records, you know. There was no, you couldn't go onto the internet and look up the tabs, or you couldn't do this, that and the other. And I didn't read music. I went to Johnny Wadham once, and I actually didn't like him. He got me down and played a shuffle, and then he put on this swing thing, big jazz thing, big band thing, and he had all the notation there and everything else, and he said he wanted to see how astute I was. Sure, I didn't even know what astute meant, you know. So I'm there trying to play this thing, and I couldn't play it, of course, and it wasn't my style, or didn't enter my mind, and I hadn't got the skills, I suppose. But he sat down behind the kit then, and he started practicing this himself. So I said, I don't think I'll go back there. I mean, I went there for lessons, and he was showing me how good he was. And some of the other lads that were going to him were ending up playing in his style. And subconsciously I said, I don't want to emulate somebody, because if it was Noel Bridgman or some other rock drummer, that might have been different, you know. So from there I went to, there was another band called Demon Duck. They used to play Wishbone Ash stuff, and they broke up, and then I went to them, and we called the band Zebedee, but we were doing Wishbone Ash and the Allman Brothers and stuff like that. And then after that, I got the Gary Moore band broke up, and they came back to Ireland, and there was myself, Brendan Finglas, Paddy Mulligan, and Jimmy, Dave again mostly, and there was a cottage out in Lusk that the boys had, so we went out there and jammed. So I was jamming with Jan on keyboards from the Gary Moore band. I think Declan was playing bass, Declan McNeilis, Pat Farrell, you know, Philip Donnelly, and Dave, I can't think of his name. He's in Fair City. He was doing singing and playing harmonica, and we were there night after night, basically smoking a lot of cigarettes and just playing music. At that time, people would just jam and see what would come out, which I found absolutely terrific. So the idea was we put a band together, and at that stage I decided, Philip Donnelly was saying, right, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Still not knowing what the scene was, business-wise, how to get gigs or doing stuff like that. So I decided to give up work. I was working at the time, and I was going to throw my lot in. You know, I said, well, if this doesn't happen now, I can't see anything on the horizon. So I did, and nothing happened. We didn't play any gigs, and then we're going to put a 3-piece together, Philip, myself, and Dave. That never happened either. But from that then, between meeting up with Pat Farrell and the other guys came along, then I started playing with Pat Farrell, James Delaney, Declan McNeilis, and then a band called Sundown, and then Red Peters would be with us, Honor Heffernan behind on the night, a brass section some other night, and all that sort of stuff. That was around the time of the bombings in Dublin. We used to rehearse in Morden's Hotel every day, the afternoons. I think that particular day the bombings went off, I think there was a bus strike, but we couldn't make it. The rehearsal wasn't on, but as far as I can remember, James Delaney was in because he didn't realise we wouldn't be there, and I think he was in the phone boxes in Gardner Street at the Labour Exchange there when the bombs went off on Talbot Street. That's my memory of it. I may be wrong there, but so we were kind of blessed because we would have been walking up Talbot Street that time, getting the bus home and stuff like that, you know, at about 5:30. That's the time the bombs went off at. So I don't know whether that's significant in anything, but it's just a, sort of an offhand way. And of course, none of us were driving at the time or doing anything, you know. When I was playing with the band Zebedee, we rehearsed 3 times a week. And after work, I'd go down to Minute to rehearse twice during the week and then on Saturday, you know. So there's a lot of rehearsals going on, and everybody was pretty dedicated, you know, to a point. And so we melded into, with Pat Farrell and Sundown, the band was called. And then played Morans. And that was around the time that U2 were starting. I think U2 were the only ones that didn't know how to play but knew how to market. I remember one night they came in, I didn't see them, I didn't know who they were, giving out badges, you know, U2 badges. And they were playing up in the Dandelion Market at the time. And we were struggling, you know. The gigs would be full, let's say. I think it was like 50p in or something, you know. And by the time all this was paid for and that was paid for, you'd be coming out with £2 or something for the gig, you know. So there was all this going on, and then there was another band in between that. When the Gary Moore band, that thing with Philip and all stopped, another band, like the Chips, they broke up. So Frank, I can't think of his name, bass player, Gary Moore band, and Ken and Nicola, and then Jan, the keyboard player at the Gary Moore band, we got together. Actually, I got a phone call. I was in my local pub, and I got a phone call about 10:30 at night from this drummer, Gino was his name, a guy from Chicago who had been playing with Chips. You know, he was absolutely brilliant, this guy. So I don't know how he knew I was there or whatever, but he asked me to, he said, John, I'm going back to Chicago and we're looking for a drummer and I've mentioned your name, would you like to try it out? And I said, sure, yeah, that'd be brilliant. And he said, well, we're over in Bray Film Studios rehearsing. Would you like to come over? And I said, well, I'm over here in the far side of the city, I have no wheels. And he said, would you not get a cab over? A cab? So that's a year's wages to get to Bray from here, you know. So anyway, they came over and they had a van, the transit van with the airplane seats in it and everything, and went over to Bray Film Studios, big huge hangar, and there was Horslip's PA, all their lighting rig and everything, and reel to reel tape to tape all the rehearsals and stuff. And so I just played, and they said, okay, right, do you want the gig? And I said, okay. Then again, I thought I was on to another little world where there was management involved. Horslip's management were supposed to be going to be looking after us as well. Michael Deeney, I think his name was. And I never actually met the man. Everything was like that. It was all stories about this, that and the other, but sometimes you never ever met the people or you weren't in direct contact with them. But anyway, that all dissolved, but the band still stayed, and they were living in rented house up in Sutton on the coast there. But the guys were starving, you know. They had no income. The boys were going around selling pools to feed themselves. This is Jan, and Jan, keyboard player, he's still gigging. He went off to play with Camel, and then tour with Caravan, you know. And he's still gigging. I actually saw YouTube recently. Lovely guy. But the funny thing about Jan was he was a great sort of soul player, you know. And yet when he went to Caravan and Camel, that wasn't the type of thing that they did. It was kind of like progressive English, sort of very English type of thing, you know. Lovely guy, So that kind of dissolved. Where did I go after that? I think I went back to. Then I went to Red Peters and the blues band.
Lord West.
Yeah, Red. At that time there was Joe Staunton, myself, Bernard Fuller, and the brass section. And twixt and between, it was one thing and another, and it was kind of going in and floating in, and it was a floating Dublin blues band, so there was floating musicians, and that band particularly had there was always great drummers, So David Gaynor had been doing it just before I did, so there was a level all the time that you had to kind of go to, and what I found was you don't know when you're playing what level you're at yourself. You just don't know. You never hear yourself play. You hear what others can do. You can never actually hear what you do yourself. So to be in amongst all these luminaries, as it were, it was a great respect for people, And but at the time, I suppose everybody was looking to make a living and see if they could make it. But Ireland sadly never had any people that wanted to put money into anything, like to bring bands in to record or anything like that. So we suffered badly. The great talent that was around, and that talent was being shifted off into different bands. Like, oh, he's a great singer. He's this. He's that. We'll take him in. All trying to form a good unit. The reality of it is that you can get four guys together, and they can be absolutely superb together. Because everybody was trying to emulate the Stones and the Beatles somewhat. And when you think about the Beatles, four guys, three of them could sing. Boy, could they sing, could they write, could they do all of those things. We were more or less copiers. We copied the English bands, we copied the big bands, the Black Sabbaths, the Deep Purples, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, the blues. And so the genres became, you played a certain thing. Of course, the lads were more interested in the blues, which is a different thing to play. Lots of people try to play it, but it's very hard to play it well. I don't know what it is about it. It just is. That's the way it is. So the level, as I say, when I was starting, we were trying to emulate the likes of, as a drummer, the likes of Bill Ward, Black Sabbath, Ian Pace, Deep Purple, Mitch Mitchell, for God's sake, Ginger Baker. Like, there's some people that we tried to emulate all the time, And it was a kind of a very heady scene, because at the time people must remember too that people were starting to smoke different things and start to do different things, and it was a kind of a hippie movement, and it was a time of change, great change. So I was kind of 2 or 3 years, or maybe 4 or 5 years. When you're a teenager, that's a lot, in comparison to the other guys who were doing this stuff all the time. But I would say, in my memory, I just always relate to Skid Row all the time. All the time. I got to see Gary Moore when he was 16. I think he was 16 for about 20 years. But, because that's all you ever heard. He's only 16, he's only 16, he's only 16. So, but to be doing that, and then the type of music that we were playing, that we were all playing, wasn't mainstream music. So the reality from a business point of view is that out of 4 million people in Ireland, the majority wanted country and western and pop music. So the likelihood of having big audiences for what we were doing, particularly if you were playing the blues, and I think it still resonates today, where there's no outlet still in the mainstream media in this country. 50 years later, there's still no outlet for that music, or anything other than top 20 and maybe a bit of country or some old music. And I suppose that's important to say to people, because the access to one hearing the music was very limited. It was through a transistor radio, listening to Radio Luxembourg and stuff like that, to Kid Jensen late at night when he was playing AC/DC, and all the new bands, Jethro Tull and all those kind of things. And the other thing was that there wasn't the gigs here, the venues for the big bands. The only venue really was the stadium. You know, so, and I went to see Jethro Tull. I saw Fleetwood Mac with, you know, Peter Green and all those things. So, yes, went to see The Nice, but, you know, Status Quo, all those. Anything that came over, we would try and get to see. But the stadium was really the only place to see it.
It was.
And then Bob Marley came over and he played Daily Mount, and I got to see that, which was absolutely amazing. So when you saw these bands and with our big PA systems and everything seemed to be whatever, one, we didn't have that industry here. There was no money in it. There was nobody who wanted to put money in it. And anybody who wanted to put money in it, and just prior to that, you had the Musicians Union, the Fed as they used to call it. Now, I was never part of that, but I never heard anything good about it from the people who were ever in it. And they used to get the gigs. If there was any recordings going, they would send certain people in to do those recordings and stuff like that. So it was a clique. Everything was a clique. Same people all the time, no matter what you did. And it was always the case, if you were playing the blues, you should have been doing something else. And when you were doing something else, you should have been playing the blues. You know what I mean? So I went through that with Pat and the boys, Declan McNeilis, Jimmy Faulkner, of course, Honor Heffernan, her sisters. But it was a great grounding. But then again, when you played in these bands, other people would come and see you. So if they were putting something together, then they might have ideas about whatever. And in typical Ireland, you get something good together. And we never sort of accepted a level of where we're at, although everything could be improved on at any time. But there was always this sense of somebody in the band wanted to do better, or had another idea that they could do something better. So there was a lot of chopping and changing, you know. So we went through all that, and then I decided to go and do sort of cabaret gigs and wedding gigs and all that, because I needed money. So I went through a period of that, and at the time it was said to me, because I did that, someone asked me, had I sold out? Except from a musician's point of view, what it did was that you had to learn all the other stuff as well, but you didn't sort of pick it out bit by bit and rehearse that much. So a lot of the musicians then, like myself, what we would do was somebody would call us and say, there's a gig on here, so you went to it. So essentially you would have to really have all the music that was ever made somewhere in your head here, even though that you hadn't played it. Not that you would play it perfectly, but it'll be in and around, you know. I mean, you had to know all the Beatles, you had to know all the Stones from the beginning. And as the years went on, those old tunes that you sort of grew up to listening to were the ones that everybody was playing anyway. And if you go 50 years on now, they're still playing them, which is hilarious. But that was expected. It was expected that, you know, if somebody rang you for a gig, that you played, and you played as best you possibly could. So you had all this library in your head of all this music. Lucky enough, from the cabaret scene and the wedding scene and that, there was, I suppose, 20 tunes that everybody played, you know. And you know, ba-da-da, da-da-da. Like, if I heard that tune one more time, I'd you know, you'd want to sort of kill yourself. And yet today, people still think that will be one of the big numbers of the night, as it were. So from a musical point of view, it was very unsatisfactory. Um, and it wasn't easy work. Um, Although you were learning in a different way. It's like everything in the music business. You might be playing something that you don't like, but you're actually learning something. You don't know what it is until it comes to a stage somewhere else and you apply that thing, you know. But in that too, when you're hopping and trotting from one guy to another, you're meeting other guys, you know, and you're probably hoping that they'll call you back and then you get the odd gig so you can build up your diary and you'll have a few gigs a week and tide you over and stuff like that. And it was a great time with Red and the boys. It was very strict in a sense, very casual but very strict. It was always everybody expected a performance all the time. It wasn't just get up and play any old thing. It was a performance, and I think everybody tried their best to do that. And I suppose I took the whole thing very seriously, and I suppose I worried about it too much. And drummers tend to do that. Stupidly, you're wondering. I should have opened the hi hat on that bit, and I didn't do this, and I didn't play that, and I didn't do this. But the reality of it is that the people listening haven't got a clue what a hi hat is in the first place. You know, I remember one person saying to me, "John, see that drum on its side, the kick drum? Do you ever play it? You know." So it makes you wonder, and it's only the knowledge is only in with the musicians. And what the musicians don't realise is that when people go to look at a band, they go to look at it and hear it, but they also go to look at it. It's a visual thing as well, and some people weren't really interested in having a look. I think that the look was always grunge. The dirtier looking you were, the more you were dressed for the gig. Something like that. It was a very strange sort of thing. I think it's probably still the same today. Whereas Pink Floyd, Dave Gilmour, Commander Gilmour, still wears his black t-shirt, you know. But that's his trademark, and Roger Waters. I started to do sound then with Errol Walsh. He was playing with the business, but then he got a country team together, and he was looking for a sound man, and I was always interested in sound. So I found myself doing sound. I'm not a sound engineer, but I just have a pair of ears. I can mix a sound sort of thing, and I used to enjoy that. So I did that with a few bands, and I was actually doing it with the business. Noah Bridgman, I think, was playing at the time. Yeah. Anyway, then I started playing with the business at some stage. I think it was after Don Baker left. There was myself, Jerry Hendricks, Pat Farrell, and then we got Dennis Doran in. Yeah, that was one of the lineups. We did a TV thing, Nighthawks. And then the lineups changed. The business as a band, when it started out, there was Fran Breen, I think was the first drummer. Then there was Davy Gaynor. And which is kind of funny because going back to Red House, when I met Davy Gaynor in the beginning, Davy was like myself, starting to play, you know, but for some reason he wasn't actually gigging himself, but I actually used to use his drum kit. He had a kit of Premier, and swapped over to the kit of Premier, and then Davy started gigging himself, you know, so we go back a long ways in that regard. And so Davy was playing, and Davy was playing with Red Peters as well. So it's a big family, and like a family, the family doesn't always get on. And there's all these close associations, and very close associations, and very close friendships. But we don't send each other Christmas cards. You know, it's that kind of a thing. All those otherworldly things that most people do, the musicians do not do. And it's sort of a given that even though you're not playing with a particular person or whatever, or band, you're still in that band, but you're not in that band, but you were in it. and those, it's like a big jigsaw puzzle, really. And of course, some of the guys aren't with us anymore, and now it's getting to the stage where a lot of the guys are still playing, and the music that we were playing then is more in vogue now than what it was then. And the younger musicians coming up, they don't have, I suppose, the people to look to. As I say, going to see Noah Bridgman playing in Skid Row and all these things, Greg Donaghy and all those drummers that are going on. I can't think of all the names of drummers, but of course, Brian Downey and, it just, Tin Lizzy, as a three-piece, another band that just would blow you away, but there wouldn't be thousands at the gig, and there would be the musicians sort of at the front of the gig in awe of these people, looking at Eric and Philip. I mean, for God's sake, like, out of all the people in this country, Philip Linnett was a guy, when he walked into a room, he just had he had the magic sparkle, The fairy dust was on him from the first day I ever saw him. And I thought the same for Gary Moore and Noel and Brush as well. There was this pixie dust or fairy dust on these guys. I know Philip concentrated on his look and everything else, but his performance just as a singer, not playing the bass, was always something. He would just hold your attention, doing little dances and messing around and stuff like that. And he used to do a tune called Sky Pilot, where he'd make some sounds of airplanes into the microphone and bombs and things like that. I used to love all that sort of thing, I eventually got to the stage where I couldn't do it anymore because of personal issues, and I had to make a decision, family or gigging. There was no choice in it, so I chose my family, and I'm still there, and the desire to get up and play is still there, but I don't really want to do it either. To me, it's too much. Like, there's a lot of effort goes into it, and that's the tiring bit. Actually playing is wonderful. It's getting there, and all the accoutrements with it is a pain in the arse to me. You know what I mean? I still love it, but none of us. The whole thing that strikes me about the whole thing is none of us had a business head on us. Not one person had a business head. What you had was in a band was the guy that got the gig, and he would have a business head on, in that sense. But a business head insofar as the overview of things. Where's this going to go? Can we put an album together? Have you got material? Put this material with that. We didn't have those opportunities. If we went in to record anything, it was like all rush and hurry. There was no 6 months over a guitar lick or 3 weeks to get a snare sound, in the case of some of these other big bands as they do. And there wasn't the producers to suggest things and all the rest of it. So everybody was doing it when they could, whenever they could. And that's a sad indictment to the whole industry, where there isn't a big catalogue of, it doesn't matter whether it's very good or not, but the enjoyment that all those bands brought to people wasn't captured, in a sense.
Morning rain keeps on falling, like there's tears fall from your eyes. Yes, I sit in my room, staring out of the gloom. Yes, the rain is the same. Oh, blue. I can't help but thinking sun, you just shine on my back door. Now the sun turn to rain, all my laughter's turned to pain. Yes, the pain